right about time to bring you up to speed with what's happening globally and in Nigeria. We begin with Kamala Pelosi pressuring Biden on 2024 bid. Bangladesh job quota protesters seek nationwide shutdown. At RNC, Trump's VP Pete Vance praises boss as caring fighter. China suspends new nuclear arms talks amid Taiwan support, and Southwest China mall fire kills 16 people. On U.S. 2024 election, according to a report, top Democratic leaders in the United States, including Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and Nancy Pelosi, have voiced concerns to President Joe Biden over his ability to win the presidential election in November. Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, and Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, told Biden, who is 81 years old, to withdraw from the presidential race, report said on Wednesday. Schumer appealed a blunt conversation with the president in Delaware on Saturday, making the case it will be best if Biden dropped out of the 2024 presidential race, report said, citing a knowledgeable source close to both men. Hakeem has also expressed similar views directly to Biden, suggesting he should drop out of the race, report said, citing a source familiar with the matter. Meanwhile, the former House Speaker Pelosi was reported to have told Biden in a recent call that polling shows he cannot defeat his challenger Donald Trump and could even destroy the Democrats' chance of winning the House in November if he continues seeking a second term, according to the report. The report came as California Representative Adam Schiff became the highest profile Democrat to publicly urge Biden to drop his re-election bid, and fresh polling from AP NORC Center for Public Affairs Research indicated closely 2/3 of Democrats nationwide want the president to step aside and nominate a different candidate. Schumer's office responded to the report about his meeting with the president with a statement calling it idle speculation, and said the Democratic Senate leader conveyed the views of his caucus directly to President Biden on Saturday. A Pelosi spokesperson said, according to reports, that the former speaker has not spoken to Biden since Friday. Andrew Bates, White House spokesperson, said Biden told Schumer as well as Jeffries that he is the nominee of the party he plans to win and looks forward to working with both men. Both of them surpass his 100 days agenda to help working families. Biden, who tested positive for COVID-19 on Wednesday, has repeatedly rejected calls from Democrats to drop out of the race following his halting performance in a debate last month against Trump. Now, students protesters seeking an end to quotas for government jobs in Bangladesh have called for a total nationwide shutdown after 6 people were killed and hundreds wounded in clashes this week, raged by high youth unemployment, with closely 32 million people out of work or education in the total population of 170 million. The students have pressed for the abolition of a quota of 30% reservations for the families of veterans of the 1971 Independence War. Protest coordinator Nahib Islam said, and I quote, "We will go ahead with our plans for complete shutdown. All establishments will remain closed. Only hospitals and emergency services will remain operational, with ambulance services being the sole permitted transport." Several government and private offices were open on Thursday in the capital, Dhaka, with 3-wheelers and motorcycles on the streets, although public buses were fewer than normal. From Wednesday, authorities closed all public and private universities indefinitely and sent riot police and the border guard paramilitary force to university campuses to ensure law and order. The protests are the first major challenge to Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government since she won a 4th straight term in January in an election boycotted by the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party (BNP). On Wednesday, in an address to the nation, Hasina vowed her government would set up a judicial panel to probe the deaths after police fired bullets and tear gas to scatter protesters. The Supreme Court will hear the government's appeal against a High Court verdict that ordered the reinstatement of the 30% reservation for the families of war veterans on August 7th, she added. Hasina asked the students to be patient until the verdict. The violence was triggered by nationwide clashes between thousands of protesters and members of the student wing of Hasina's governing Awami League party. At least 3 students were among the 6 killed in Tuesday's clashes, police said. The demonstration strengthened after Hasina, the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who led Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan, refused to meet the protesters' demands. Right groups such as Amnesty International, as well as the United Nations and the United States, have urged Bangladesh to protect peaceful protesters from violence. Back to U.S. 2024 election, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, has hailed the ex-president's deviant reaction to his attempted assassination in an inspiring speech to the Republican National Convention, casting his boss as a tough fighter who also cares deeply about the United States and its people. Accepting the nomination for vice president at the RNC in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on Wednesday, the Ohio senator hugely shunned belligerent rhetoric in favor of an upbeat message, pointing to Trump's response in the moments after he was shot during a campaign rally on Saturday as proof of his leadership and love of country. Vance, who described Trump as an idiot and reprehensible in the lead-up to the 2016 election, said the tycoon-turned-politician had endured abuse, slander, and persecution to serve his country. Looking to portray a softer side to Trump, who is known for his acerbic rhetoric and spiteful attacks against critics, Vance said the Republican was also a devoted father and grandfather, as well as a successful businessman and politician. Vance, who rose to national fame with the 2016 publication of his memoir Hillbilly Elegy, continually appealed to working-class voters in the key swing states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, recalling growing up in a small town where people spoke their minds, built with their hands, and loved their God. The three Rust Belt states flipped from Trump to Biden in 2020 and are considered vital to the outcome of the election in November. Vance said President Joe Biden had for half a century been a champion of every single policy initiative to make America weaker and poorer, including the free trade deal, NAFTA, and the war in Iraq. Once a harsh critic of Trump, Vance changed into one of the former president's staunchest defenders during his successful run for a Senate seat in Ohio in 2022. The former U.S. Marine, who at 39 is the first millennial vice presidential candidate, is broadly seen as a potential future leader of Trump's Make America Great Again movement, which has reshaped the Republican Party along populist and nationalist lines. To China now, China has halted deliberation on nuclear non-proliferation and arms control with the United States in protest against Washington's arms sales to the self-ruled island of Taiwan. On Wednesday, the U.S. called Beijing's decision unfortunate, while analysts say the move deals a potentially grave setback to global arms control efforts. China and the United States started nuclear weapons negotiations in November as part of a bid to reduce mistrust ahead of a summit between President Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. More dialogue had not been publicly announced since, with a White House official in January urging Beijing to respond to some of our more substantive ideas on risk reduction. A spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lin Jian, on Wednesday said the U.S.'s arms sales to Taiwan, a territory that it claims had seriously compromised the political atmosphere for continuing the arms control consultations. Consequently, the Chinese side has decided to hold off discussion with the U.S. on a new round of consultations on arms control and non-proliferation, the spokesperson said, according to reports in Beijing. The responsibility fully lies with the U.S., he said. Lin added that China was willing to maintain communication on international arms control, but said the U.S. must respect China's core interests and establish required conditions for dialogue and exchange. The U.S. switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing in 1979, but has remained Taiwan's most significant partner and biggest arms suppliers, taking repeated condemnations from China. Taiwan has protested for the past 4 years about stepped-up Chinese military activity close to the island, including almost daily missions by Chinese warplanes and warships. In June, Washington approved 2 military sales to Taiwan worth approximately $300 million in total, mostly of spare and repair parts for the island's F-16 fighter jets. According to reports from China, 16 people were killed after a fire broke out at a shopping mall in southwest China on Wednesday. A 14-story building in the city of Xingong Sichuan province. Around 30 people were rescued from the blaze after closely 300 emergency workers and dozens of vehicles were dispatched from the local fire department to the scene, reports said. Preliminary probe suggests the fire was caused by construction work, citing local officials. China's Ministry of Emergency Management, in a statement on Thursday, urged rescue workers and provincial officials to determine the cause of the fire as soon as possible and to learn lessons to ensure greater security in the future. Such incidents are not unusual in China, where enforcement of safety standards is often lax. In January, a fire at a mixed-use building in southeast China killed at least 39 people, just days after another blaze at a boarding school in central Henan province killed 13 children. More stories and back to the United States. Biden, positive for COVID, cancels Las Vegas campaign event. Joe Biden, United States President, has tested positive for COVID-19, forcing him to cancel a campaign event in Las Vegas. A pressure builds on him to drop his re-election bid because of his age. Karine Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, said on Wednesday that Biden, 81, was experiencing mild symptoms and will fly to his home in Delaware, where he will self-isolate and continue to carry out all of his duties fully. Jean-Pierre said Biden planned to spend a long weekend at his Delaware beach house. It was unclear how long the sickness will keep him from the campaign trail. The president's physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, said in a note that Biden presented this afternoon with upper respiratory symptoms to include rhinorrhea, runny nose, and non-productive cough with general malaise. After the positive COVID-19 test, Biden was prescribed the antiviral drug Paxlovid and has taken his first dose, O'Connor said. News of Biden's illness had first been shared by the CEO of Unidos US, a Latin civil rights group in Las Vegas. Biden had been slated to speak at the group's convention on Wednesday afternoon as part of an effort to rally Hispanic voters ahead of the November election. Janet Murgua, the CEO of Unidos, told guests that the president had sent his regrets and could not appear because he tested positive for the virus. The president's diagnosis comes amid strong scrutiny of his health and stamina after a disastrous debate with ex-president Donald Trump that triggered a force of concern among Democrats that Biden is not up to the rigors of winning another presidential term. Germany to cut Ukraine military aid by half. According to a draft budget approved by the government, Germany is planning to nearly halve military aid for Ukraine next year from about $8.7 billion US dollars to around $4 billion. Finance Minister Christian Lindner said Ukraine's financing was secure for the foreseeable future due to a G7 group of rich nations came to raise $50 billion US dollars from interest on frozen Russian assets. After the US, Germany is Ukraine's second biggest military donor. In 2024, Berlin's budget for Kyiv is set at closely €7.5 euros. The planned aid cut comes amid fears in Ukraine and among its European allies that US funds could be cut or even stopped if Donald Trump wins the presidency in November's election. Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. On Wednesday, the draft budget was approved by the German government. Although military support to Ukraine is set to be reduced, the defense budget for 2025 will be raised to €1.3 billion to €53.25 billion. This is still less than the €6 billion for which Defense Minister Boris Pistorius had been pushing. Germany overall is planning to meet the target of 2% GDP spending on defense as needed by the NATO alliance. The defense budget will still need to be approved by lawmakers. Coming down to African scenes, Rwanda's ruling coalition wins most seats in parliament. Rwanda's ruling coalition is leading with the highest number of seats in the legislative election, with President Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front (RPF) remaining hugely dominant with over 62% of the votes. Other historic parties, notably the Liberal parties and the Social Democratic Party, received almost 11% and 9% of the votes respectively. Parties allied with the RPF, some of whose leaders are ministers, supported President Paul Kagame during the presidential campaign and followed him in his campaign meetings. The two groups outside the coalition and its allies, PS Imbarikuri and the Democratic Green Party, finished with a little more than 5% of the vote, hence reaching the minimum threshold to obtain seats in Parliament. Following these proportional representation elections, the composition of the Assembly is anticipated to change little compared to the one elected in 2018. The Electoral Commission has not yet provided the distribution of the number of deputies by political party. President Paul Kagame has won 99% of the vote in provisional results from Monday's presidential election in Rwanda. Electoral authorities said an outcome broadly anticipated as the country's long-time ruler aims to extend this three-decade grip on power. Kagame's opponents, Frank Habineza of the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda and independent candidate Philippe Mpayimana, were getting under 1% of the vote in provisional results, counting for 79% of all ballots cast. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, more news, particularly from Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back. Now, news from Nigeria. Let's begin with Tinubu urges NAS to raise 2024 budget to 6.2 trillion naira. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has asked the National Assembly to add the 2024 budget to 6.2 trillion naira from 28.77 trillion naira to 34.9 trillion naira. On Wednesday, both chambers, the Senate and House of Representatives, promptly conceded President Tinubu's request for amendment of the 2024 appropriation bill. In letters addressed to the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, and the Speaker of the House, Abbas Tajuddin, President Tinubu also requested that the Finance Act 2023 be amended to enforce a windfall tax on banks to generate additional revenue. Senator Tinubu requested the withdrawal of 3.2 trillion naira from the Consolidated Revenue Fund for capital expenditure and another 3 trillion naira for additional recurrent spending for 2024. The Senate advanced the consideration of this request by giving them first and second readings. They assigned their committees on appropriations and finance to provide further legislative inputs and to report back within a week. The leader of the Senate, Senator Michael Okpeyemi Bamidele, explained that the amendment bill was intended for funding infrastructure projects and meeting recurrent expenditure requirements. The amendment to the Finance Act 2023 was aimed to enforce a one-time windfall tax on banks based on their foreign exchange gains in 2023. Senator Adamu Alero stressed the significance of supporting the bills to make sure funds for minimum wage payments and infrastructure projects. Other senators, including Senator Garuba Maidoki, Adetokunbo Abiru, Adams Oshomole, and Sani Musa, also expressed their support. And finally, on the news, talking judicial matters and also on politics, court restored Shaibu as Deputy Governor of Edo. The Federal High Court sitting in Abuja has reinstated Philip Shaibu, the impeached Deputy Governor of Edo State, back to office. The court, in the judgment that was delivered by Justice James Omotosho, declared his purported impeachment by the Edo State House of Assembly as illegal, unconstitutional, null and void. It held that the said impeachment was in gross violation of the provisions of both sections 188 and 35 of the 1999 Constitution as amended. The court, aside from restoring him to office as the Deputy Governor, held that all his salaries, allowances and benefits should be paid to him from April 8th, when he was unlawfully impeached, until the expiration of his tenure. The court issued an order of perpetual injunction restraining Governor Godwin Obaseki and the Edo State House of Assembly from stopping Shaibu from performing the functions of his office. It also ordered the Inspector General of Police to quickly restore all his security details. The court maintained that the reason the Edo Assembly gave for impeaching the plaintiff was lame and implied of an orchestrated political dispute. A recap of major stories says Pelosi pressuring Biden on 2024 bid. Bangladesh job quota protesters seek nationwide shutdown. At RNC, Trump's VP Pete Vance praises boss as caring fighter. China suspends U.S. nuclear arms talks amid Taiwan support. And Southwest China Mall fire kills 16 people. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching.